everyone. Thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Amanda Vinicky. 2025 began with terror and anguish.
The screams, I mean, you can't think about, unhear that.
An Army veteran's alleged ISIS-inspired terror attack runs down and kills people celebrating in the French Quarter, prompting concerns about safety at Chicago's popular outdoor festivals. There's extra surveillance at Trump Tower, too. Meanwhile, sparring over a new contract for the Chicago Teachers Union moves from private talks at the bargaining table to dueling bids for public support. Students are set to return from a holiday break that was anything but for school leaders. 2025 is also set to ring in budget challenges for the city and state, and immigrant advocates are preparing for what President Donald Trump's administration has in store. And joining us for our Week in Review panel, the first of 2025, is Steve Daniels, the Chicago Tribune's editorial board member, Francia Garcia Hernandez of Block Club Chicago, Adi Quigg of the Chicago Tribune, and our own Matt Masterson of WTTW News. So this New Year's attack in New Orleans, obviously shocking and sad. A lot of questions. Francia, was there a way to prevent this?
Difficult question to answer for sure, but I think what authorities have said and have shown is there is some enhanced alert for attacks in cities all over. We saw the attack in Germany at the Christkindl market just a few weeks before. So I think authorities had to be on alert. It is hard to predict every single attack, but every mass gathering, every large crowd has to be considered as a place of a potential safety threat.
And of course, Steve, Chicago has a lot of these festivals that Francia just brought up. The Christkindl market, Chicago's over, unfortunately. I didn't get there this season, but is there anything that can be done when a vehicle is used as a weapon? Anything that you're looking for Chicago law enforcement to change?
I mean, you can put up barriers, concrete barriers around our targets, areas that you think are, particularly enticing to a terrorist. But the short answer is no. I mean, obviously you're going to have way too many gatherings of people in which you're going to have somebody putting up concrete barriers temporarily or permanently around sites that might be a target. We've seen these vehicle attacks all around the world, and not just recently, but over the years. And it's sad, but it almost seems like it's something we just have to live with. And
again, these Chicago street festivals, I mean, you have them in a matter of days. It's not as if they're long-standing events, unlike, I guess, Bourbon Street in an area that was attacked here.
Right, and every terrorist attack is different, and it's, for a while we didn't feel safe going to movie theaters. For a while we didn't safe going to music festivals where we could be shot at from giant hotel rooms. A lot of this is not preventable. There's not a lot you could do if someone has intent to do harm.
And Matt, you of course cover a lot of law enforcement and security. What comes to you? What are the questions that are going through your mind?
Again, I mean, what else can there be done? There were some barriers put up, I believe, around there, and the vehicle went around them. I mean, there's only so much that you can do to keep people safe, and it seems like there were definitely steps taken to do that. But when somebody is dead set on doing this, and there's a lot of planning that goes into it, it seems like that things like this can happen, unfortunately, and there's only so many steps that law enforcement can take. They can get all the information they want from other sources or whatnot, and they probably didn't hear much about this one random person who was going to get a truck and do this.
Sad news there, and of course also condolences to the family of the state trooper who was laid to rest today, Clay Carnes. Let's move on to something more political, and that is dueling press conferences held just this afternoon between the Chicago Teachers Union and the Chicago Public Schools as they're negotiating a new contract. We're going to get to the new part in just a minute, so Matt, beware. But Adi, I want to go to you first because a lot has happened over the holidays, and for people that were maybe more concerned with spending family time, wrapping gifts, what have you, they may have missed out. Catch us up, just the rundown of what all has happened at CPS. Pedro Martinez, still the CEO, but.
Yeah, this was kind of like a stunning Friday right before I think everyone was anticipating going on break. We had been hearing rumblings that the board was moving to fire CPS CEO Pedro Martinez, likely not for cause, which would mean that he would stay on for 6 months. There were rumors they would try to install a co-CEO. And knowing this, Pedro Martinez's attorney went to court basically seeking to prevent that firing or any diminishment of his role as CEO. Basically, the board is barred now from diminishing that role. We'll see how that goes in practice. CTU negotiations are ongoing, but it sounds like Pedro Martinez will at least be in place for this 6 months that is required in his contract, which means that CTU still has to deal with him and can still use him as kind of a punching bag.
Yeah, it seemed like the board was ready to dial things down for the year. The new elected board is coming in, obviously, this month, but the previous board had their monthly meeting, and they called a special meeting on top of that to go ahead and terminate Pedro Martinez. That, again, without cause, so he'll be around for the six more months. But it was kind of a stunning surprise move. I've seen a CEO put in jail. I've seen a CEO resign during an ethics investigation, but never one fired by the board so abruptly like this one.
Abruptly, and yet contracted at the same time, because we had known that this was coming, and then in such short order, in really sort of under the cover of Christmas, this occurred. Matt, let's stick with you, because again, we did hear from both the administration and the Chicago Teachers Union today. Could you give us an update on what Martinez and other CPS administrators shared about negotiations / what else?
There was a little bit of optimism from both sides today. Both sides talked about progress, which isn't a word that either side necessarily uses. There's been significant tentative agreements reached. Those aren't finalized, but they're in agreement in principle on areas like healthcare contribution increases, special education, sustainable community schools, things like that are generally agreed to. But there's a lot more to be done on pay, on class sizes, staffing levels. These things still need to be sorted out. But both sides today said that there had been some positive talks this week. The CTU board the CPS board members had gone last week, and they were no longer allowed to be going. So these talks are just going.
Another court order.
Correct. After Martinez went to court about that. But that kind of struck a tone with both sides. Neither was super thrilled with how that was handled for a bit, and then it seems like things have progressed further since then. So a little bit of optimism from both sides. The CPS hasn't given too many updates during this today, but Pedro Martinez did speak. He said that they've made progress on staffing, that they have offered 4% raises for CTU members. They're seeking 6% over the first 2 years, 5% for the second 2 years of this deal. But they're still dealing with a massive structural deficit, and they're going to have to kind of negotiate the current budget that's been approved. They're going to have to go back to that and amend it whenever this deal is finalized, but it's a matter of making all these numbers work, and there's still some decent amount of work to be done on that.
So you said that both sides signaled progress, and yet the Chicago Teachers Union leader and President Stacey Davis Gates accused Martinez of slowing down negotiations and continually referenced him, Steve, as the supreme being. What do you make of that moniker?
I think it's probably a derisive term that's meant to signal her unhappiness with the fact that the mayor has been sort of sidelined here. The board that represents the mayor has been sidelined here, and here is a sort of bureaucrat who's been elevated through this court order into a position, what frankly ought to be. I mean, the CPS CEO should be the one negotiating contract. We're just in a bizarre situation right here because we have a mayor who is, frankly, a tool of the union. I think that's been demonstrated at this stage. Normally, we would have a mayor who would be on the other side of the table from a union trying to protect taxpayers. We don't have that. So Martinez is in that role, and the union, Stacey Davis Gates, doesn't like that. So that's the.
Is calling him supreme being effective? What does that do?
I don't think so, but I mean, again, if you're going to take a constructive view of it, which Frank, I don't see much of one, but here, if I'm going to try, that it's again signaling to the public that this isn't how she thinks things should be. The mayor ought to be the one to call the shots on what the contract is going to include. Now, of course, we also have a hybrid school board that's about to, with elected members for the first time, who are going to be taking office in the middle of this month, which will introduce a whole nother area of interest here, because many of those people are on Martinez's side, or have expressed that they are on his side in this. Once that board sits down and meets and starts talking about all of this, we're going to see open disagreements, which we've never seen on a school board, or almost never, in terms of public airing of disagreements on the board itself. It's just going to be wild.
Francia, what's your take here?
Well, I think there's a lot that the incoming board will have to take care of. Another part of the decision that was made on the December 20th meeting was a resolution to keep Acero schools open, 7 of them which were announced to be closing next school year. But Acero officials said we haven't heard or we haven't seen this memorandum of understanding on how we will keep these schools open, yet the resolution was approved. So there are still questions about funding, what will happen. These are unionized teachers who work at these schools, but parents have urged CPS to keep the schools the same way, which would be interesting if they're not going to be run by the charter, if they are absorbed by CPS. So the board has a lot to take on as they start, and I hope they're preparing for, board management 101 and all the advanced courses, because there's a lot to handle.
It's also complicated. What does have to happen in order to keep these Acero schools open?
Well, there needs to be funding, and there needs to be a plan on whether Acero charter schools, the charter network, will keep the schools open and where they'll get the funding, because the network claims they don't have enough funding to keep the schools open, hence why they were closing, because of their enrollment numbers going down and federal funding going down as well. So there needs to be some sort of funding solution to it, and then a plan to transition these schools from Acero to CPS.
Now, as you noted, it requires money. It's not as if CPS is flush with that, and already the budget passed does not take into account whatever degree of raises are going to be brought in. Matt, can you sort of clarify, because again, Martinez has gone to court. He cannot see diminishment of his authority as CEO, but he's supposed to, as CEO, I thought, take direction from the board. So when he's called supreme being, how much unilateral power does he really have?
It's a very interesting dynamic between the board and the current CPS leadership. It's never really been the case where they aren't completely aligned. I can think of I don't think there's ever been a single vote since I've been covering CPS where the board did not approve or unanimously, in most cases, unanimously approve items on there coming from CPS or vice versa. They're usually very much in alignment. So this is a very interesting time where the board and the CPS CEO are at odds with each other on such a massive issue like this, and they have forced him out. He'll be around for 6 more months, but he is going to be leaving because of the board deciding that he hadn't met his duties. So it's a very interesting time and dynamic. Even with Acero, that's an issue where the board really was pressing on CPS. CPS said that they were already looking at solutions, but every single board meeting, the members were speaking to Martinez about getting something done. And during one of these meetings I believe it was in December, CPS came up with these solutions of absorbing some of the schools, absorbing all the schools, closing them, how it was going to be. So a lot of this came about because of kind of a push between the two of them. Some of this helped maybe spur what's going to happen with this arrow, but it's not something I can really recall of the sides really being in this contention with each other.
Game this out some. What does this mean politically? You have, again, a teachers union aligned really with the mayor's administration, a CEO that is emboldened by court rulings, and yet weakened in some regards because he's on a timeline. What are we setting the school year up for these next 6 months? And what does it mean for the mayor?
Well, the thing we have to keep in mind is that the majority of new board members that are joining are CTU or mayoral aligned. So he's got that in his favor. He had that with this outgoing board that he appointed en masse after that en masse resignation. But we're going to have to get through these complicated board dynamics. We don't really know what it's going to be like to have a board this large with this kind of experience coming off and straight from the union. That's going to be interesting. What I'm paying attention to kind of looming over all of this is the money. CPS is in, I think, a $500 million deficit heading into next year. I don't know if that counts a 4% raise for teachers or not. Yeah, so that's gonna be a huge one, and we have to also keep in mind we have all of these overlapping budget crises, and no one is going to come to the rescue. The state's going to have its own budget problems. CTA is going to be asking for money. City of Chicago is going to be asking for money. All of these other school districts across the state are going to be asking for money. COVID money is running out. I think at the end of the day, hopefully, people are keeping in mind how much money there is and what can realistically be done to keep the district solvent long term.
Steve, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, just on the political matter. Pedro Martinez is on a timeline. Stacey Davis Gates is on a shorter timeline. People need to remember that there's going to be spring CTU leadership elections. And that's well before Pedro Martinez is done as CPS CEO. If they don't have a contract by then, she's going to have to go try to win re-election without having secured a contract from her members. And you're going to have definitely opposition parties coming and saying, you didn't succeed, your strategy didn't work. And so the pressure, in many respects, is much more on CTU and her than it is on Pedro Martinez.
Well, and I think that one of the questions, many being asked by families of CPS students, is, will there be a strike? Does that help or hurt her position and or the CTU?
You might have a better idea of that.
There hasn't really been any discussion of that yet publicly. They haven't ruled it out. They haven't said that that's something they're looking at. I think they would absolutely like to avoid that if possible, the CTU that is. I think that things are probably progressing well enough at this point where that's not something that's going to get thrown out there. There hasn't been much talk of a potential strike. But the CTU leadership has put out some informal deadlines that haven't been met yet. They wanted a contract by Christmas. It didn't happen. They wanted one by the new year. It didn't happen. They want one by Trump's inauguration. And we'll see if anything happens in the coming weeks. But if those keep getting set informally and missed, then I don't know what's going to happen. Are they going to continue to get upset as these negotiations go on?
And the CTU making the argument that the district has the tools, the financial wherewithal to avoid what they're calling austerity measures. What tools? We've just talked about this $500 million deficit.
Well, they understand that the deficit's real. That's something that obviously the district is going to be dealing with, and the contract is going to have to reflect that as well. They've come down in their pay requests, the union has, and some other staffing requests as well. This is what CPS was talking about today. But there still needs to be some medium where they can all reach an agreement and get this all settled out, where the finances are actually going to go with that as well.
So a lot for students to come back to when they get back to their classrooms on Monday. This, again, huge for the mayor's administration. He does now have a 2025 budget in effect, which means that those of us who use streaming services, Netflix and such, will be paying more for that. Additional parking sticker costs in those residential zones, plastic bags costing more money. Francia, is this something that regular citizens of Chicago are paying attention to?
I think the property hike was one of the most sounded potential hikes that Chicagoans were paying attention to and were not happy about, but these will also hurt a little bit some families. Some people are concerned. Some of those who are very opposed to the mayor will call out every single increase and every single increase of cost of living in Chicago as something that is not beneficial to the city, especially with storefronts being vacant and businesses complaining about not having enough clientele and safety, and it turns into a bigger conversation. These are not as bad as a property tax hike would have been for the mayor's administration if approved.
And Steve, what does this mean for the mayor's relationship? What does he want to do in 2025 that his relationship with alder people that got pretty contentious over budget negotiations will be impacted by?
Well, I think that 2024 was just the, opening chapter in what is an unpleasant book. And I think 2025 is going to be harder, frankly, in terms of the budget dynamics. Yeah, the city didn't raise its property tax levy. Residents will be paying more in property taxes for a bunch of complicated reasons that you guys all well know, and I won't take a ton of time to explain, but people are going to get their property tax bills on the residential level, and they will be up significantly in many cases, and they're going to be wondering why. And at that time, the city will be having to close whatever. We don't have the exact deficit, but it's going to be significant. They'll be having to try to plug that and figure out how to deal with that as people are getting those property tax bills, those second ones, in the fall. So it's going to be brutal.
AD, you have done reporting on Cook County's attempts to, in the future, perhaps even this year, really overhaul this property tax whole system. Do you see that happening?
This year, no. There's no way. It's too big, too complicated, often requires a lot of moving parts in Springfield and buy-in from this massive property tax system we have. I mean, we have a million taxing bodies in Cook County. We have We've got the treasurer, we've got the assessor. The assessor and the board of review are fighting enough that they can't get minor agreement on a lot of stuff. So if I had to make a 2025 prediction, I would not say we're going to get major property tax reform. I think we're going to get some interesting ideas this year. I think we have more groups inside government buying into looking into this and reforming it. Will they get something big done this year?
And let's go back to the administration, because you've also done reporting on some turnover within the Johnson administration, in particular, 3 spots that he's got to fill. What are those positions, and is that a sign of any sort of disquiet within the 5th floor, or just regular old turnover?
If you talk to any of the people that left, it would be regular turnover. It's been a couple of years. They've gone through a lot. This was a very tricky budget. A lot of people try to stay for a year and change and say, I've helped with the transition, time for me to do something else. So the mayor has to replace his policy chief, his head of family and support services, and his comptroller. And like, comptroller does not sound like a super important in the news position, but the person that left had really good relationships in Springfield and did a really good job understanding and explaining the budget to all kinds of stakeholders. The mayor has said, I'm going to go down to Springfield and try to get progressive sources of revenue. So that was a big loss. Policy chief, this person was also the person who drove the Bring Chicago Home entire campaign. I'll be interested to see if the next person they bring in finds some kind of alternative that kind of delivers on the mayor's vision. And DFSS, I could see being important with potential deportations coming up, and just like regular run-of-the-mill handling of homelessness and all kinds of other social services in the city. We have no idea what kind of demand there will be on those services with the incoming Trump administration.
So Francia, let's use that to go to you. We do have, as of today, Republican-controlled Congress, new members installed in Washington, and soon we will have a new president and President-elect Trump moving back into the White House. The migrant community preparing for mass deportations. What are you hearing about preparations there?
There is a lot of fear and anxiety among families who have been here for a long time, undocumented families, mixed status families, but also new arrivals, people with asylum cases or pending asylum applications who were given temporary protected status or parole and are here in the country. They're also trying to get their footing. They're waiting on work permits. There is a lot in the immigration system that needs to be processed even for the current immigrants. And then there's a talk about mass deportations starting in Chicago, but we also haven't seen plans on how that will be carried out. And we've also seen reports that it would be very expensive and it requires a lot of manpower to carry out these operations. Nevertheless, the threat is there. The threat feels real for many of these families. And many advocacy groups are saying, get your documents ready. If you're detained, be ready to have a lawyer on hand, get powers of attorney ready in case you're detained and you're separated from your children. So obviously, it's a complicated situation for many families.
So many questions, but it's very real. And the Tribune reporting this week that, for example, one church canceled their Spanish-speaking services, right, Steve?
Yeah, just we don't want to have a whole bunch of people massed in a physical location where agents could potentially come in and take people away. It sounds, like some kind of draconian, horrible thing, but that's the real fear that Francia is talking about, and they're not taking any chances.
Matt, we've got 30 seconds left, so I want to go to you. You are our guy on the Madigan trial, and jurors were on break, but attorneys were in the courtroom this week figuring out jury instructions. Why is this so complicated that it takes multiple days in court?
It's been a 3-month trial. There's a lot of things to go through. These jurors are going to have to figure out a lot of things on almost 24 charges against Madigan and his co-defendant Michael McLean. There's a lot to parse through, especially with the Supreme Court decision sort of reimagining how federal bribery statutes are listed. That's a lot of what they were talking about this week. So the wording that's going to go into this could very well help decide if these 2 men are guilty or not guilty on some of these charges. So.
Thank you for that wrap up. 100 pages of jury instructions or so, right there in 30 seconds. With that, we are out of time. Our thanks to Steve Daniels, Francia Garcia Hernandez, A.D. Quigg, and Matt Masterson. We will be back to wrap things up right after this.
Tonight's presentation of Chicago Tonight, Week in Review, is made possible in part by Ann and Rich Carr, BNSF Railway, Francine and Dr. Anthony Brown, and the Mollenhauer Progressive Philanthropic Fund in honor of Ida Mollenhauer, supporting quality journalism. Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that is our show for this Friday night. Don't forget, you can get Chicago Tonight and the Week in Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thank you for watching and Happy New Year. New Year brings new laws, some 300 of them in Illinois. Steve.
Yeah, a lot of, well, you know, there's a lot of big stuff that we're going to have huge changes to our health insurance system, most of this taking effect in beginning of 2026, but I kind of like the random little weird laws. So, yeah, you're going to get 3 days warning before your teaser rate on your subscription, your Netflix or your whatever, so that you get some fair warning to cancel it before the rates take
Before
effect.
the hike goes up even
under
further,
state
having
law.
nothing to do
So
with the Chicago budget.
I approve of that one. I mean, I got a whole bunch of subscriptions I got to get rid of. And then, yeah, you can't park on.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, and proud sponsor of programming that offers advice and strategies to enhance the physical and mental well-being of fellow legal practitioners in Illinois.